actually just stumbled across something really, really interesting, something that I think can help people change their bad habits really quickly and help them develop good habits really quickly as well. Instead of waiting 21 days, this is the sort of technique that you can use to help you change those bad habits within a very, very short period of time. I'm talking here 5 minutes. This discovery I found by reading a book called In Search of Memory by Eric Kandel, who's a Nobel Prize winner in science for the work he did on memory and the biology of memory. And it's just a fascinating read. I'd really recommend it to anybody who's interested in the mind and how you can use your mind to perform better. Now, Eric Kandel, of course, is a neuroscientist, so the stuff in the book is a little bit complex to read, but it's an autobiography of his life, so it gives you a really good overview of the development of psychology and memory in particular, and how you can apply that to your life. Now, the discovery that I made that was, the discovery for me at least, was how you could actually use the information that Eric Kandel discovered and the people before him to help you change habits really, really quickly. And part of his book, and one part of his book, he talks about Pavlov and the experiments that Pavlov did with his dogs. And I'm sure you've heard of Pavlov and the experiments where he would ring a bell just before he would feed his dogs, and he'd continue doing that over a few days, and then after a while the dogs would be conditioned, and so all he'd have to do was he'd only have to ring the bell and the dogs would expect the food and start salivating automatically without even the food being there. So he discovered that you could actually condition dogs using a method like that, and also that you could condition humans in the same way, so that if there's a particular stimulus, that automatically act in a certain way as well. But Pavlov also did a number of other experiments. In fact, I've never really heard this before, but he actually used some electric shocks with dogs to see what sort of responses they would have. Now, there were three things that he discovered, three different sort of responses with different stimulus or stimuli. And the first one was habituation. Secondly, there was sensitization, and then thirdly, classical conditioning, which is the one that we're really interested in. But let me just go over these first two with you as well, because they're really, really interesting. Habituation, the first one, was where Pavlov would apply a small electric shock to the dog somewhere, at first the dog his ears would shoot up, and he'd respond to that because there's only little shocks that they wouldn't respond in a big way, but they'd respond nonetheless. And then he'd sort of keep on applying this little shock, and what he discovered is after a while the dogs would get used to this shock, this small shock, and they wouldn't respond to it anymore. And so they discovered, similarly in humans, we get the same effect if there's a particular kind of stimulus that gets applied from our environment to us over a while. If it's the same stimulus and it's small enough, we'll get used to it. So, for example, if you're living next to a train station or something, then at first you'll really hear all the noises from the train, but then after a while you won't hear it anymore, and it'll go into your subconscious, and you'll get habituated that those noises, your brain will get used to it, and you won't hear it anymore. So that's the same thing. It's called habituation. Now, the second thing that Pavlov discovered was sensitization, and this is where he applied the same smaller shock as an habituation, but then get them used to it. But then after a while, he'd apply quite a big shock in isolation to the smaller shocks, and then of course he'd get a response, quite a dramatic response from the dogs. But then after a while again, he would just apply the small shock again, and he discovered that his response of the small shock after the small shocks following the big shock would be quite dramatic as well. So the application for humans is, for example, if I would touch you just on your shoulder when you're relaxed, or when it's just normal, you probably won't respond too heavily to that. But say, for example, a bomb just went off, and I would just touch you on your shoulder again with this same pressure and force, you'd respond a lot more dramatically than you would have before the big bomb went off. So that's called sensitization, where you actually become more alert because of a particular big stimulus that got applied. And an Eric Kandel actually showed that there are some physical changes happening in your brain with both habituation and sensitization. With habituation, your synapses actually, they actually retract. Your synapses is at the end of your neuron, basically, for your brain cells, and they're used to transmit information between cells. And so what he discovered was with habituation, your synapses would actually retract and or shrink, and you'd get less of them, and as you get used to a particular response or a stimuli. And with sensitization, it would actually grow. Your synapses would grow for that period of time, but then after a while it would taper off again. So that was really interesting. So there's some physical changes that change inside of your head. But the third one is what really got my attention with classical conditioning, where Pavlov applied a small stimulus, electric pulse, to the dog's paw, for example, and then he would immediately follow that with a shock stimulus. And so essentially what would happen was the dog would associate the small stimulus with the big shock stimulus, as long as these two happened in close proximity of each other. That was the important key thing. And so he discovered that he would very quickly be able to condition the dogs to respond to these small shocks. So only after a few conditioning signals, he'd only have to apply the small shock, and the dog would respond in the same way that he would if it was a big shock. And that would last for a very long period of time. And so basically the application of human beings is that we could use that principle to either get rid of bad habits or gain some good habits. And just to give you some examples, say for example you read your emails when you're not supposed to read them, and say you read them right throughout the day and you can't wait to read them, and it's a real distraction because you can't actually get any work done, and you want to get rid of this habit. One thing you could do is to have a little rubber band tied around your wrist, and every time you think about reading your mail when you're not supposed to be reading it, you simply shoot yourself with the rubber band. So immediately after you think it, you shoot yourself. So you start associating this thought of reading your email with the pain in your wrist, and so after a while, you only have to think about it. Essentially, you'll stop thinking about it because your brain will associate this thought with that pain, and so your brain also always wants to move away from pain and towards pleasure, and so that's a really easy and quick way to help establish that habit. So you don't have to wait 21 days to establish that habit. You can do it within 1 day or within a few minutes if you depending on how often you think about reading your email. Now, conversely, you could apply that to developing good habits as well very quickly. So similarly, the idea is there, whenever you do something that is considered a good habit, reward yourself with something pleasurable immediately after that good behavior. So, for example, if you're able to focus for a long period of time, and you've just realized that, reward yourself with a lolly or some sort of a stimulus that gives you pleasure, like going out for coffee or paying yourself some extra money, whatever it is, so that you could confirm that good habit. So, and that way you can very, very quickly develop good habits, and eliminate bad habits very, very quickly. And I think that's really, really powerful for if you want to become successful, because success is really about having a bunch of good habits and being able to do things on autopilot and becoming successful on autopilot without even thinking about it. And that's really where the key lies for me. So that's classical conditioning. So if you could think about a few other examples in your life, have a little rubber band around your hand for getting rid of those bad habits. If you only get rid of your bad habits, then you'll already have a massive advantage where you wouldn't have had that before.